showing, and yet got this up on the screen. So there we go. Let's get the Flipboard set up. And Leroy Jenkins says Sachiko. There we go. At least you have a check-in. This is true. So let me turn off the video over here and just quickly get set up. Let's go into the topics for tonight. And so typically whenever I'm tweeting or Facebooking or doing all of that good stuff, I do not like to cover crime stories or stuff. That's just me. There are some people who get into what's a little bit depressing. I think the other thing about covering crime stories is that they are prone to painting a false impression, and it's not really what interests me, to tell you the truth. I mean, of course, sometimes there are interesting crime stories, but I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on interesting stuff about Japanese society and whatnot. So I don't really cover that stuff very much. However, this week there have been like a series of stories that highlight social themes that I've been talking about here for a while now, and I think it's informative. The incidents themselves are tragic and horrible, and but at the same time, I think they do tell a story about the society. Even though, of course, Japan continues to have 120 million people going down slowly, so you can't always be too judgmental based on a couple of news stories. I mean, Japan's had some mass stabbings, for example, recently, and some people are saying, well, Japan has a mass stabbing problem. It's just like America, or what's the difference with guns if they can do stabbing? And yet America yesterday had its 150th mass shooting this year. So, things are on a different scale. But that said, the problems that we have, I'm not interested in being relativist. I live in Japan, so let's talk about it in terms of Japan, and for that it is interesting. I'm just adjusting my monitor here, which I've moved closer than usual tonight so that I can actually get a good look at all the comments on my beautiful big screen that's right here that I guess you guys can't see. I could show you that if you'd like at some point, but it's not very interesting. So yes, let's see who's in here and say hello to everybody. So we've got Bald Berlitz Boy saying boom, good to see that. Indeed, Tachi-gun, it's been a busy week. So it's been a busy week for me, by the way. So a lot of the sort of side projects, I guess I should talk about side projects first, but I will come to that. Yeah, some have moved forward, most have not. It's just, life is like that sometimes. The J-Vlog, early this time. Yes, I'm glad you were early. I'm sorry I was late. Years do go by in the blink of an eye now. Setsuna, that happens as you go through life. Quinn Rankett, good to see you. Why does someone come here to downvote when they haven't even watched yet? Because they're dicks, but that's, hey, it's a free country. Haters gonna hate. Do what you do. And ex-lover, if you go. I wish I had ex-lovers to come and down thumb them. But like, yeah, I'd have like 1 million down thumbs, if it was that. Perk, thank you for your. I don't know what would be more depressing if that were the case, that it's an ex-lover or that there's only one. I mean, I don't know. I feel complicated about that. Couldn't rank it. Indeed, I must have made a lasting impression. The J-Vlog, we've got Steve from Berkeley. Maybe it was an accident. Who knows? I mean, I think this is fun. I would watch this, but that's just me, But there again, someone who's not even watching it yet. Who cares? Honestly, who cares? Haters gonna hate. Marlon Orlando, good to see you. We've got who else we got in here? We've got people chatting and saying hello. We see James Kelly, Leroy Jenkins. That was James Kelly saying that. Well, good to see you, Leroy Jenkins. We've got Mr. Cordy Chap, lettuce and tomatoes. Good to see that. I don't know why you're saying that, but I'm sure that there was a... Oh, I see. For me, it is lettuce and tomatoes. Hiko says Simon. Oh, I see. I'm now going up the chat. I see people are talking about groceries. And yes, indeed, the J-Vlog. Amazon Fresh is here in Japan. They only deliver to the west side of Tokyo, and so I'm east side. Gang, I can't do it. I'm on the wrong side of I'm on the wrong side of the railroad tracks for Amazon Fresh. But they did this big hookup with Life Supermarkets that got announced this week, which means it'll be like in America where you can go to Whole Foods and pick up shopping and stuff like that. So again, if you're in a neighborhood that has a Life Supermarket, it's worth checking that out, because that is going to make it interesting, and I think they're going to set up grocery delivery with them as well. So yeah, that was interesting news. I didn't cover it this week, but yes, indeed. what else we got here? We got James Kelly, Perks, Steve from Berkeley, all these people I've said hello to. Odie Jr., good to see you. Boom, good morning to you there in America, if I recall correctly. That's why it is the morning for you. We've got Barringer, good to see you. Good evening. Kayan Kodos, glad you made it. And it's not even 10 a.m. where you are right now, says Martin Orlando. I feel like I live in your immediate past due to time zone chicanery. Yes, indeed. Well, New Zealand is, of course, as we like to say, the first to see the light. It is the fastest country in the world. Japan is about 4 hours behind New Zealand, but we do okay. So welcome from Japan in the far, far east. Although it's a circle, so who really cares about that? I mean, it could be anywhere. It's an arbitrary line. So what's going on in my life? What's not going on is I've been meaning to get up and do a big promotion for my channel, and it's just not gotten legs. I've been really busy. So that has not been going the way that I wanted to, but that is something I've been meaning to do. And honestly, again, I'm going to have to make a call on it at some point pretty soon, but I still it's been a good experience making it. I think it's a good thing, but I can't leave it up there running forever, so we'll see what happens. But I do want to do a big push and see if we can get some momentum. That's what I would like to do. I've been talking with Victor about that. Victor and I have missed each other a few calls this week, but yes, we're going to get something up. That's one. Second thing is the Tokyo Digital Crew project is also stalled a little bit, and even if it was moving, I wouldn't have had time to edit it. What I did do today that I'm a little bit happy with, I think I've told you about what happened with the last Japan Business Time. I recorded a series which I was planning to start broadcasting from now. And I got this thing that happens when you record something and it's really good, but then you discover all the technical issues you had with recording it after the fact. And we had an issue with one camera ran out of battery. One camera, the sound, I tried to make it foolproof by using lap mics, but I discovered two problems. One, if you use a really long lap mic cable, even though if it says that it's for the purpose, it can still result in bad sound like static and whatnot. The second problem is that if you record near Tokyo Tower, we were warned not to use lap mics near Tokyo Tower in the recording studio at the YouTube space, because it can mess with the signal, because the Tokyo Tower is also a broadcast antenna, and it did mess with the signal. So although we got a good audio from the camera in the room, and good enough sound for 6.5 of the 8 episodes, the battery ran out on that camera. Fortunately, I had a second camera, but the second camera had the sound plugged directly into it with the bad sound. So I started, in any case, that was discouraging, and that between that and the busyness, I kind of put that project aside a little bit. But tonight I actually did. I went and edited 4 episodes, and they're all really good episodes, by the way, and I will get those out soon, and I think I might put them up more than once per week. I want to get the next season up ahead of Rochelle's event on June 21st. So look out for those really soon. The good news is that the first few episodes are in good shape. The latter episodes, it's listenable. I took some advice on this. I talked with some people and they suggested, well, maybe have the sound and maybe subtitle it or do something like that, which maybe I'll do. Yeah, it's a little bit awkward that they came out so terrible with the sound, and it's a shame, but they still have good content and they are listenable. I did just review them. I think if I apply like a hiss remover, you can do things to clean up the audio. I might ask for some help with that, probably from the Tokyo Digital Crew, but it can be salvaged. And in any case, I just basically in detail, because I was using 2 cameras, so I had to watch it in detail, everything. And the first 4 episodes are really good, and they're coming really soon, so look out for a new Japan Business Time coming out really soon, so that should be pretty good. Degens Konto, good to see you, and just in time for breakfast. Bake me a kipper, do all of that, I don't know, that's what people say sometimes. Good to be joining you for breakfast, and yes indeed, there is mold in your butter thing, says Mr. Cordychep. I don't understand that. Hey, believe in yourself, good to see you, welcome to the show, and g'day, Degens Konto says down the bottom, which g'day right back at you. So yes, I got a bunch of stories anyway, and I've tried to order them in some sort of order. I had some time to do that tonight, so that'll be pretty good. Remember, as always, if you want to catch my attention with a comment, if you do like an @ Hiko Simon, it will show up like bright orange to me here in the side. So not just writing Hiko Simon, write @ Hiko Simon, and it will highlight You don't need to super chat, but if you do, I'll stop the bus, and I will answer whatever it is if I can. So remember, the point is I've got my topics, but of course I didn't get the 35 ultra wide monitor. No, but it's a nice LG. What is this? This is 28, but it's 4K, so it's a really compact 4K monitor. It's pretty good. So anyway, yes, like I say, indeed, Sergeant Bilko, welcome to the show, and I can indeed see that is working. Test. So yes, remember, I will stop the bus if you want to do that. And this is the point. I've got my topics, but if you guys want me to talk about something, or to elaborate on something, or to dive deeper into something, or whatever, that's what I'm here for, right? So please, let's make it interactive. I will not keep up with the chat unless you directly highlight to me, and I'll try to pay attention to that. So yes. Believe in yourself. On the 27-inch 4K monitor that I have, it's good for video. I do find, like what I've done is, I used to have this pushed back, like with my other two monitors, so like would go round like in an even shape. But because the 4K is such smaller resolution, it means it's really hard to use to browse or to use normal web. To read web pages or whatever. I find I have to zoom in on them and stuff like that. So the thing is, the resolution is so great, I've actually brought the whole screen closer to my face. It's a little bit of a weird setup now, where I've got one monitor close to my face and two kind of on the side further back, but this works better. So it's good if you do that. It's you have to figure out, it doesn't work very well as a normal monitor setup. So yes, indeed. Any thoughts on AJ getting beaten by the kid from Up? I don't know what you're talking about, Window Liquor. But yes, I don't know what that is. So let's get into it. And starting off, the Tokyo city government is on a roll, of course, after last week shaking the earth with hatbrellas. Sure to be a thing. I mean, it's like they're an umbrella, but they sit on your head, so you don't need to hold it. You've got one hand free. It's always a hassle. You've got your bag, you've got your smartphone, you've got an umbrella. Accidents happen, people get hurt. You put it all on your head. I mean, it's just genius. Only the Tokyo governor could possibly, maybe Dr. Nakamatsu, if he became the Tokyo governor, could ever think of such a thing. So following up on that role and the success of the other campaigns by the central government for Cool Biz, Warm Biz, now they're kicking off Smooth Biz. And I must admit, I heard this and I thought about the Michael Jackson song, Smooth Criminal. It's a great song. I very much like the rhythm and the bass line to it. Yeah. So Chishi, are you okay? I don't know. Koike, are you okay? How would that go? She's suggesting that because of the anticipating crazy traffic congestion during the Olympics, both for the Olympic athletes themselves and all the visitors, and the fact that they decided to do the Olympics pretty much all through central Tokyo, and that's going to block everything up, they suggested that everybody start commuting at various times, like spreading out their commute times. Some people commuting like really early, some commuting later, probably lunches as well. At the moment it is a thing in Tokyo as well, as you'll know. You can get into pretty much any restaurant in central Tokyo if you go at 11:50, but if you go like at 12:01, you've got a queue outside of any place that's decent. So Japanese do like to do things like in order. Oh, La Migra, they're coming for me. Yes, it's always been a bit of a thing. The Japanese do things in unison. They show up, they generally commute peak is like 8:30 a.m. Because they generally get in 15-20 minutes before starting at 9 a.m. in most of their companies. They generally go home. Well, going home is a little bit more staggered, but they want people to stagger their commutes in the morning. Now, the reason that they call it Smooth Biz is everyone's basically, the government had a fantastically successful campaign, and about, when did it start? It was like 2004. It was part of a renewable energy conservation campaign to have a Cool Biz, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, announced this campaign where during summertime they said rather than set thermostats for like 26 degrees Celsius and wearing business suits, they suggested have a dress code that people could wear, like in government agencies they're wearing Hawaiian shirts everywhere, and they were suggesting you could wear like summer attire, set the thermostat for 28 degrees, have a tropical office, and we'd call it Cool Biz, and it was wildly popular. It still is popular today. I've come to the theory that, generally speaking, Japanese offices, and I think it's got something to do with just the general perhaps small body size and low weight. It is something that women feel the cold generally more than men. I saw a news article recently about this, that the idea that cold offices that we typically get in New Zealand, Australia, but also in Korea and in America are sexist, because apparently there's some research that says statistically that women are more prone to feeling cold than men. But yes, certainly, if there are physiological differences, certainly there's a lot of Japanese people who seem to be pretty comfortable working in offices that are slightly too hot. And I'm not comfortable. I am a manly man, and I fall asleep if it's 28 degrees. I can't stay awake, I can't concentrate. So I found that really tough. So I was really looking forward to the next campaign of Warm Biz, where they suggested keeping the thermostats low during winter and wearing warm clothes. However, it turns out that Japanese people just like to be warm, because that didn't work at all. it never caught on, and there's been a whole bunch of campaigns to try to capitalize on the success of Cool Biz, and pretty much all of them crashed and burned. They never caught on, just because I think Japanese are just predisposed to like Cool Biz, but here in Sweden now we have Smooth Biz. And what this will require is companies to basically change their culture to this idea that it's okay to show up, an hour early or an hour late. I think fundamentally the problem, and even this is a problem that I have, is that it's okay to be flexible, but at the same time, fundamentally, when you have a work day, if you show up an hour early and you leave an hour early, you are missing 2 hours of time. If you are in a job which requires you to be available to support people, or you're supporting other people, you should be around when they're around. It's difficult. There are reasons why people often have to move in unison. Also, manufacturing companies, they have shifts. They have, it's not easy to move things around, but they want companies to do this. It's one thing to have companies say to people, well, you can wear short sleeve shirts, but to actually change their culture to allow different working schedules. I mean, when I was at Tokyo Marine, a big old-fashioned Japanese company, they actually had like school chimes for 9 a.m., 12, 1, and if you showed up like 2 seconds after or outside of those, including coming back from lunch, you get in trouble for it. So, it's hard to take that out of the culture, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes, if it will be successful. That's a long time talking about Smooth Biz, and I've got bigger things to talk about, including this guy. This guy had to resign because he was too prone to gaffing, and this guy did so many gaffes that the LDP created a manual for representatives in Parliament of how not to gaff, and this guy must have read it, and just like the movie, was it 1942, the Spielberg movie where they've got the gun instructions. I still love the scene where they set up gun instructions, and basically in order to make sure no one accidentally set it off, when they brief the family, don't go near the gun. If you do go near the gun, don't do this, and if you do that, definitely don't do this, and if you do this, definitely do not do this. That's more or less, like an instruction manual in reverse. I get the feeling that the LDP anti-gaff manual was probably taken by this guy as the reverse manual, possibly as a public speaking manual. Hey, Andrea Mulboy, good to see you. So, yes, the end result is that this guy made a helpful suggestion at a party recently, and it came out this week, that at a party, it started innocently enough. He was saying that the Japanese government needs to create an environment where people feel safe and able to raise larger families because of the demographic problems in Japan, which, by the way, is a big theme of the show tonight. And so he said, we need to create an environment that's supportive of people, being able to have families. We need to correct the difficulties and the challenges that people have with access to things like childcare and so on. But, more than that, maybe the way to do this is for grandparents to nag their children to have kids. I mean, he said, personally, I would like to see everyone have 3 kids. He didn't say he thinks women should have 3 kids, although he specifically did use the verb to give birth. He thinks everyone should give birth to 3 kids. So unless we're talking about like the movie Twins or something, probably we're talking about women here. And he was basically saying that grandparents should nag their women children into having 3 children each to correct the birth rate problem. And of course this was taken extremely well and maturely, as you would expect. No, it wasn't. It caused another I mean, they all come from the same guy. The guy is a gaffe machine. I mean, he says obviously what a lot of people in Japan think. But yes, Andrew Moboya, I'll come to that in a moment. So we will we're going to segue from this topic to that one. 1941. Thank you, Sergeant Bilko, and I agree. It's highly underrated. I mean, that movie was so poorly rated when it came out. Spielberg pledged never to make another comedy, which I think was a great shame. There are some really fantastic scenes in that movie. I still find it really memorable, but I know for reasons around the time it didn't work. But yes, Sergeant Bilko, I totally agree. So anyway, he suggested as normal, as usual, just like we had an article in Japan Today that got taken down really quickly the other week, where a German, pro-fascist it would seem, I don't know, but very conservative social commentator said, people shouldn't be afraid to call women what they are, baby-making machines. Of course, that went down really well. That was a chat site as well, so that was... I don't know if they were doing that on purpose, but this guy just did the same thing again. And yes, again, I mean, people would say the whole reason people aren't making babies are precisely because this is how they're looking at women. They're not looking to help women. They're looking to nag and, put women in what continues to be a highly impossible position of being required or expected to work and to raise children and to meet multiple responsibilities without any infrastructure to help look after kids, nor the economic means to do so. I mean, and that's another thing which we're about to get into tonight. So yes, that went down poorly. Just similarly in terms of Japan's, I really believe that this guy was made a minister in order to make this guy look not quite so bad. Another gaffe expert, Taro Aso, the Deputy Prime Minister, when Japan's competitive ranking came out as 30th in the world, he said, well, at least we're not falling right. He kind of came out with a way of minimizing it, which it was funny when the opposition, I remember when they were in government, and there was the world's number one supercomputer, and they wanted to dedicate a huge budget to maintaining the speed of this computer. And she said, well, why can't we have the second fastest computer? What would be so wrong with that? And, that was kind of... the right-wing internet just collapsed in shock at that and said, she wants us to be number 2. How is this acceptable? He's apparently, the LDP finance minister and deputy prime minister is apparently okay with Japan being number 30 in competitive rankings and doesn't feel that that's really a true reflection of Japan's true competitiveness. I don't buy it, we're not going to do anything about it, the usual response. Perk, the baby-making machine statement, by the way, was an actual statement. It was actually a metaphor used by another elderly politician at a regional talk, talking about the productivity of the population problem and talking about women in productivity terms, saying if we were to take women as baby-making machines and, if these machines are not working or realizing optimal production, we have to do what we must do to make them more productive, i.e. he was basically dehumanizing women into their basic biological function. That also didn't go down very well, and is the standard against which sexist pro-population growth but demeaning towards women gaffes have been measured ever since. And I understand. I mean, seriously, how would we feel if the country was dominated by elderly women who describe men as ejaculation machines or something? I mean, some people would probably be okay with that, but that would be a whole different problem, wouldn't it? I mean, but that's the point, right? We're literally, if men are not producing enough sperm, perhaps we... you can flip it around. I realize it's not exactly the same because, again, the male part of the deal is obviously a lot easier and a lot shorter. It's not carrying around a baby for 9 months and then being expected to raise it afterwards. But yes, in fact, you know what, but it as hilarious and still far from reality as that analogy seems, it still is far less burdensome and offensive than the idea of baby making machines, which is an analogy that does get thrown around a lot. So yeah, I want to come back to this story. So there were a bunch of news stories this week which tap on a theme that we've been hearing back, but I want to go back in time and I want to talk about the bus stop incident, the mass stabbings, the multiple incidents in the last couple of weeks involving elderly and their children who are middle-aged, who are about my age. And the context of this, so to go back, and it goes back to the baby making machine debate as well, Japan's demographic crunch, people saw it coming basically from about, the 1970s, from like 30, 40 years ago. So Japan, after World War II, even before World War II, it was pretty normal. Anyone from that generation, anyone from the generation of people, sort of my age, from my parents' age, they all in Japan had families of like 7 or 8 kids. And this is how it was pretty much through the whole Meiji period, and before that, Japan, before it developed, Japan had a problem like most developing countries, that people would typically have 8 kids, but not all of them would survive childhood. But with the medical and technological innovations of Meiji and through the 20th century, the difference was that where people typically would have a lot of kids, but not very few of them would survive until adulthood, they all started surviving, which caused this enormous demographic, this population boom during the 19th century and early 20th century, which led to a shortage of land. And Japan had this problem with subdivision. When you have 8 kids and you keep giving the land, splitting land that you own to all the kids, it doesn't work. So they imported the European system, where land was handed down only to the eldest son. And this caused basically a lot of people to not have land and be discontent, and this really fed into the whole World War II thing. It was a Lebensraum. It was the same as the Nazi idea of going and getting more living space for our suddenly too high population. This was part of what drove Japan into this. And so it went on through World War II, and basically after the war, when Japan became very focused on economic growth and it got into this economic miracle, and they realized that the high population, the number, supporting a large number of kids in the family was an inhibitor on economic development. And they looked at Western countries that had been successful at developing to a comfortable level of standard of living, and they started, there was a big concern generally around the 60s and 70s around the whole idea of the limits to growth, the idea that the global population as a problem, humans as a problem. And Japan, like most countries, built into this idea of a policy-based population control. Now, Japan's always had pretty much easy to access abortion on demand, and not the Christian objections to it and controversy around it that you have in other countries. So they always had that, but basically, particularly from the 1970s, it became like a national standard that most people would have 1 kid, maybe 2 kids, and not like in China, they didn't need to be that coercive, although abortion was used a lot. But basically it was, it was basically, all of a sudden these families went from like 8 kids to 2 kids, and sometimes 1 kid. And a lot of people my age and younger in Japan, nowadays it is totally normal. In fact, the birth rate is like 1.4 or something, which means it's more common for families to have 1 kid than 2 kids, not replacing. So, and this has been going on since my age. So the people that I exchanged with at high school were also typically single, one child. Between the economic bubble, the miracle, the post-war economic miracle, it meant that you have a situation where you had pretty wealthy, well-to-do families with just 1 kid to spend all that money on, not unlike the situation in China, which has been more coerced. And so you had the situation where you had these families that often had land, they had a lot of asset wealth, they had a lot of money from all the work of the parents in the post-war period, and they didn't have to split it up amongst 8 kids. Also, there was a social, the way that the society in Japan works is different in the West to Western countries in terms of the nuclear family concept, which is that you have typically 3 generations living in the same house. Typically, it's normal, especially if you're the eldest son, that you'll live in a house with the grandparents, the parents and the children all in the same house. And it would be this idea that the real burden would really fall on the wife of the eldest son, who would have to look after the kids and the elderly grandparents, but the grandparents would help out with the raising of the kid. The father was just supposed to not be there and be working all the time. But this is another reason why families would really prize and look after their eldest sons, because the whole idea is that they would look after those eldest sons, so that those sons would in turn look after them when they became retired or elderly or whatever. They would provide the house, or they would take over the house, and they would look after them and give them the care. And this is why Japan didn't have elderly homes, and it didn't really have much of a social welfare system, actually, because until now the whole society has worked on this 3-generational family concept. Berenger, I'm sorry. I'll try to liven it up, but if you can't make it, you can't make it. It's still good to have you here. So you come forward everything. So what people started to notice in the 80s, and when I started learning Japanese in 1989, when I was like 12 years old, I guess I would have been 13 years old at that time, everyone was saying, everyone's just noticed that since the 1970s, Japan has been so successful with its population management program, with most people just having one or some two kids, that Japan is heading for a huge crunch. The baby boomers, where everyone was like 8-kid families, and now it's only 2-kid families. You're going to have a situation probably at the time around now, basically around 2020, 2030, and after you, when the baby boomers become, the people born in the 50s and 60s become retirees, you're going to have a pyramid. Normally a society is a pyramid with fewer elderly being supported by lots of working young, and the pyramid's going to become reversed. And no society's ever experienced this before, especially in the way that people knew it was going to happen in Japan, just based on the births from the 70s through the 80s. And they said, it's going to be really miserable for young people in Japan during this time, because the whole society is going to be crushed trying to pay to support all of these elderly people. That's starting to happen now, basically. Those baby boomers are now starting to become retired. And the way that it was always explained to me in school was, this is going to be a real burden for the kids that are coming through at this time, for the youngest coming into the job market, because they're going to be competing directly for tax money and jobs with the elderly, who are not going to be able to, have enough to sustain them based on what we have now. J-Vlog, that pissed off your family. The father died without a will and the eldest son got everything. That's exactly the scenario. There's actually a really interesting dynamic about that, which I want to talk about as well. So what would happen in the 50s and 60s with the system of most inheritances going towards the eldest son? I remember I've had taxi drivers, I've had this explained to me by multiple people, so apparently it is a thing. If you are a gangster, if you are an organized crime syndicate person and you're engaged in vice, your mission is to basically find targets and to suck them dry, to move the wealth from those people into your gang and the people in your gang. And remember, the people who would join gangs would be people typically who did not have any sort of safe background. They were often from minorities, they were from discriminated groups, they were from people that didn't have families or whatever, typically people with insecure backgrounds, and they would be very hungry to try to redistribute wealth. And so what they would do is, apparently the methodology was, they would go crazy, and this is why Japanese are so sensitive about privacy and about these, because there used to be these manually managed databases for all sorts of purposes in Japan, and one was organized crime would find out who are the eldest sons of families, and they would target them for vice. They would figure out, are they into women, are they into drugs, or are they into gambling, and whatever they find out they're into, they would go and make friends with them, offer them a few freebies on whatever they're into, the girly bar, the drugs, or the gambling, or whatever. And they would basically start trying to get them to spend money on their vices, which they would provide to them. And when they started running out of money, they would offer them loans to be able to get them more. And then they would lock it all down and they would suck them dry. That's how organized crime in Japan used to work. Sorry, Adrian, my boy, I'll bring it back. But they used to exploit this whole thing. The whole idea was, and there are so many cases, if you talk to so many people, of these elder sons getting targeted by gangsters, and so many people basically running off in the middle of the night with debts and ruining the whole family, selling off all the assets to gangsters. This is how it sort of worked. So anyway, you come back to it. What people didn't really predict, everyone expected this would sort of go through and it would really impact on the youngest generation, and that's not what happened, because what wasn't expected was the collapse of the bubble that happened in the 90s and the 2000s. And what happened with that was, it meant all of a sudden people couldn't get jobs the way that they always used to be able to get jobs, and it meant that through the 90s and 2000s, not everybody, but there were a lot of people that became parasite singles. These were people who found it really difficult to find jobs or to go and afford rent or whatever. And when you've got a wealthy parents, and and particularly when you're very invested in the idea of the eldest son that's going to look after you, they allowed these eldest sons, sometimes daughters as well. The numbers are given are in the millions, 4 to 5, 6 million people from this time, from who were entering the workforce in the 1990s and 2000s, ended up living at home, sometimes rent-free, basically living like teenagers. And I remember when I first got to Japan, it was described as a social problem. All of these people who normally would have moved out of home in their 20s and 30s, who were staying at home and enjoying that they were saving money on rent and they were getting to have a great social life and whatever, and save money, and they wouldn't have to work in big companies, and they could have part-time jobs, and they could pursue their hobbies. Also, remember during the 1990s and 2000s, video games became like a really like proper video games became a really big thing. And so you get this whole phenomenon of otaku, people becoming really obsessed with hobbies, and people who were able to and supported by their parents for living at home, taking advantage of the whole social construct in Japan of elderly parents looking after their sons in anticipation that they would look after them later on. However, what's happened is, and this is now coming out this week, damn straight they didn't grow up due to the lack of milk butter. I mean, it's always the shortages, I think, that definitely topped this off, and that probably could have averted the whole crisis. Yes, and by the way, Andrea Morboy, I will come back, but let me finish the thought. So what you have right now is you have these people who were part of the economic lost generation that found it really hard to get normal jobs, or that just became obsessed and were too comfortable to go and get normal jobs back during the 90s. They're now my age, and older in the cases this week, 40s, 50s, who have been either shut-ins, people who never leave home, and that's supported by the parents. The mother still cooks them dinner, they still have a room at their home. Or these so-called parasite singles who just stayed at home and never got married, never became economically independent. And now there's been a bunch of news stories this week, 3 stories, which fundamentally, when it comes down to it, come down to the conflict between this generation of people my age, who conflagrated the small number of children suddenly happening with the expectations of elderly that their kids are going to look after them, and hence allowing them to stay at home, with the conflict that comes when they don't follow the script, because the economy went off the rails, and where everyone is expecting this intergenerational conflict to happen between 70-year-olds and 20-year-olds around this time. It's happening between 40 and 50-year-olds and 76-year-olds, and each of these cases this week has resulted in murders, including a horrible mass murder. It's all connected. Andrea Morboy read a book this year. It's called Buy Me the Sky by Shiran, about the one-child policy, which I can imagine. I mean, in China as well, the fact that the government coerces it, I think, probably creates a different dynamic. China started this whole thing after Japan, and it is arguably heading down the same road, although what's really significant, and what I think is characterized Japan, which will make it different to China, is the effect of the bubble bursting in the 90s, and what that did to that generation of people. It meant that at that time, on the one hand, the benefit of the Japanese social system, where basically families would act as social welfare and would sort of take care of these people even when they don't have jobs. If this happened in America or in Europe, and you had 20, 30-year-olds out of work, which you have in some places like Spain, that would be a huge political problem. It would be a huge issue that the country would have to deal with, because these people would be out, living on the streets, or committing crimes or doing whatever. Japan avoided the normal social fallout associated with an economic collapse because these people just went and stayed back home, and they had a social system where these parents had the wealth and the willingness to look after and allow their kids to come in and continue sort of living off them like teenagers. The thing is, that's continued, into the 30s and 40s. And now you have the situation. Some of them have become unable to leave home, some have never held down proper jobs, and some of them are basically, and it's coming to a point now where now the elderly need care, they need someone to look after them, and yet their kids expect still to be looked after by their parents, so the social contract's been broken. And the first of the cases that happened, this is in reverse order, was yesterday. A former top bureaucrat from the Farm Ministry, also ambassador to the Czech Republic, apparently murdered his son, his 44-year-old son, who they've already tracked down the social media of the son, and the son was on social media, he was into playing Dragon Quest. He was bragging at having spent thousands of dollars each month that he got from his parents on in-game purchases on this game. He tweeted about fights he had with his parents, including his belief that it's the social responsibility of parents to look after children until they're ready to look after themselves. And and he's 44 years old, but he still wasn't ready, and that he felt entitled to be looked after. And apparently at some point the father just freaked out and stabbed him multiple times in the stomach and killed him. The irony is, so when a bureaucrat or someone high-ranking like this, there was a case like this in Ikibuku a few weeks ago, where a former high-ranking bureaucrat was driving a car, and it looks like well, it looks for all money. Like, he was like 70-something years old. He lost control of his leg, or he pressed the wrong pedal. He drove through a crowd of people. He ran over and killed a woman and her like 2-year-old daughter in a pram, and injured like 20 other people. And he was not arrested. They arrest people in these situations normally. And people were saying the police were being deferential. This was like favors because he's an ex-bureaucrat. This guy's also a high-ranking ex-bureaucrat. He was arrested, which people are saying, oh, so even though he's a high-class citizen, is the sort of slightly slang and derogatory term for it was given. They said, oh, they arrested him. But they didn't arrest him for murder. They arrested him for attempted murder, which is funny because the only victim in this case is extremely dead. So how do you arrest someone? It looks like the police were still trying to show deference or respect for the guy by not charging him with actual murder, even though the person's dead. Apparently you can... It can be attempted murder. I mean, again, they're probably going to move on. Normally what they'll do in a normal murder case is they'll charge you with improper handling of the body to buy time to basically coerce a confession out of you. But it looks like they've kind of gone soft on this guy, and they've actually charged him only with attempted murder. But apparently, and they've already said that he pretty much owned up to the whole thing and said that he couldn't take it anymore. The son was entitled. He was violent towards the parents. They were getting old. They didn't know what to do. He killed them. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that one. What's happening? Are there issues at the moment with the video? What's going on with the audio? It's a bit laggy. I'm sorry if it's a bit laggy. Maybe if you refresh, it might help. I'm sorry if you're getting that. Hi, Tai Nakamura. Good to see you, man. So yes, anyway, the second incident that happened this week was in Fukuoka. It was where a shut-in, a 41-year-old, I believe, or 40-year-old or something in Fukuoka, was apparently confronted by his mother and his sister. Why don't you get a job and move out? You're in your 40s. And he flipped out and stabbed them. He killed his family. So this was a case of before was the dad killing the 70-something dad killing the son. Now you've got a case here. Hey Jasmine, nice to see a new name there, Jasmine Segrist, and good to have you in the chat. Now you've got a case of the son flipping out when being shut and being confronted with his parents with being kicked out, and he killed his family and then set fire to the building after stabbing them. No, he hit them with a hammer and then stabbed them. I mean, it was nuts, right? But again, the social pressures of all of this sort of care, it's kind of what's buffered Japan from having more harsh fallout from the economic collapse of the 90s and the early 2000s. But now it's all coming to a head now, where after 20 years of these people continuing to live at home, it simply is now they're getting confronted, and now they're murdering their families. The third case this week was this guy. This was the Kawasaki bus stop incident. This guy, another guy, they couldn't find a photo. He's 51 years old. They couldn't find a photo of him from outside of junior high school, which he after he didn't go to high school. He stopped school after junior high school. And it seems like he during junior high school, apparently he did have family problems, and he did go and move in with his uncle and aunt, who remained his sort of guardians, his de facto parents, and he pretty much stayed living with them. And 51 years old, apparently, the story goes that city council welfare officers were checking on this person as a shut-in, and the family found that he was locking himself in his room and not talking with them. So they sought advice from this council welfare office on how to talk to him, and they started exchanging letters when they were talking. But they didn't know. The parents were at a loss as to what to do with this guy. And yes, apparently he went and bought some knives and picked a spot near a bus stop and went and stabbed 20 people, killing 2, an 11-year-old school student and a bureaucrat. And then he stabbed himself in the neck and killed himself. In his room, it seems that he had magazines on mass killings, and he did research and whatever, he was into it. And he planned this out, and he basically obviously felt like he had nothing to live for. So all of this kind of comes from, I mean, he's a little bit older than me, but he was also from the generation that had, if he had been born 10 years early during the bubble, you didn't have to go to high school to get a high-paying job in construction, or, there were all sorts of jobs that didn't require a full education that paid really well, and those people were looked after. But after that, the guy had probably, not much in the way of prospects, and he was more or less a shut-in at home. He had no social ties, he had no family, his parents were becoming elderly, and again, there's been a lot of commentary that it seems like this was a murder in order to commit suicide, and the comments which are distasteful, but I have to agree, if you are going to do that, which I don't think you should do, but if you do it, please try to minimize the harm to other people. I think it is, while there's debate over saying that suicide is selfish, certainly killing other people in the midst of your own suicide, that is definitely selfish. And 3 horrible incidents, but all stemming from the same sort of social issues, which are basically they come down to this whole big story about Japan's demographic change, the elderly population, the role of 3 generational families, and right now this problem that the current, what would normally be the chonan, I mean most of these cases involve chonans, the eldest sons, where they would normally have families and they'd normally be working and providing both for the elderly and the children, and the wife would be looking after them at home. And the normal Japanese social situation is being broken, not in every case, not even in a majority of cases, but in a minority of cases, but a significant minority of cases. You're starting to see more and more stories like this of elderly freaking out, not being able to deal with their children who are not acting, who are my age, who are not, because of the economic collapse in the 90s and 2000s, are not meeting the expectations. And these kids as well, who, the tension within families. You're seeing a lot more cases of violence towards and from elderly. And we expected this might happen from young people, but it's not. It's happening from middle-aged people. So, it's horrible, of course, but it's a really interesting manifestation of these problems, which we all knew were coming from 20 years ago. And you could say, I think, that the Japanese government, from a policy perspective, has really tried to postpone and avoid dealing with these issues. There still isn't a good safety net. There isn't a good means to support these people becoming independent of their families. The Japanese government and welfare state in Japan relies heavily on families playing this role. And what's happening is now already the social pressures on a lot of families are so great that this is starting to happen. And you've got to wonder what's going to happen when this becomes worse in the next 10, 20 years. When you get more and more elderly, and the elderly living older as well. And they're being supported by single, shut-in, And again, take the case of the bureaucrat's son here. He actually was tweeting about wanting to kill his mother after she broke some of his plastic figures, his plastic anime models. So you have people 44 years old living at home wanting to kill their parents because they won't pay for their in-game purchases, and breaking their plastic models and trying to kick them out, and it's resulting in murders. It's and we are at the thin edge of the wedge, right? This is something we're seeing. The fact that there've been 3 or 4 incidents like this week in a country where you never see stuff like this, it really says, I think we're seeing the start of a social phenomenon that logically connects with the other issues that we've seen in the society up until now. Now, I was told when I was 13 years old to expect in Japan. In-game purchases, that's a separate controversy, but certainly to the idea that it becomes a vice. I think the whole debate about loot boxes in America, you get a lot of people. I mean, when you are living off your parents' money and you are spending thousands of that on in-game purchases, I don't know that it's necessarily blaming the game companies, but certainly, for a lot of people, again, the debate about games becoming a form of vice and addiction is another debate. But yes, anyway, this is something that, what's interesting is that it's affecting my generation, actually. Mine seem to be like significant players in this, maybe more than was being expected, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens around this. Other stories that I've saved, I saved this this is another crime story, but I thought this was Okinawan police. What is wrong with Okinawan police? So apparently they arrested a panty thief, a man who would go around and steal underwear from people's verandas all over Okinawa. He formed a collection which he looked after very carefully. When the police apprehended the panty thief, they called the press and they displayed the trophy of laying out very neatly all of the stolen underwear. Now, I could understand if this was a drugs bust or like a guns bust or something like that they would show what they got. But I think the whole point here is that it's pretty embarrassing for the victims to have their underwear being stolen in the first place. And the motivation of the criminal was to lay out and enjoy the possession of having all of these women's underwear. Like, from what I can see, the actions of the Okinawan police laying out 400 pairs of underwear on a blue mat like this is pretty much revealing the same actions and motivations as the thief himself. In fact, I believe it's probably, this looks like an inside job if you ask me. I mean, maybe the guy was framed, I don't know. Okinawan police obviously have nothing better to do. Obviously, while the stories that I just talked about may paint a picture of an increasingly crime-ridden Japan, obviously it can't be that bad if the police have the resources to lay out 400 pairs of underwear and call the press. So yes, there was that. There was another case also, and again, some more discussion today on Twitter. Don't mess with the police in Japan, even though they do seem to have weird ideas about stolen underwear. There was a case where a 21-year-old student was apparently he started struggling while being arrested by police. So a number of police, I believe 10 police officers, tried to hold him down, and when they held him down, he died. There are all sorts of police brutality cases like this in America, some on video which are horrible to watch, but you can see where police just by asphyxiating or causing a thrombosis or something, just by holding them down, it can affect the circulation. This is something that can happen. However, this is what the debate on, or the discussion on Twitter was all about, was that although Japanese police are pretty non-confrontational and they're not very aggressive with policing generally, you don't want to be belligerent with them, you don't want to make trouble with them. And the case in point which jumps out to me is the story I raised on the show a few months ago now about the lamp boy, the American tourist to Japan who broke a lamp and got into a debate with overcompensation with the shop. And when the police came in, he tried running away. The mother says he accidentally scuffed their chin, which sounds to me like he struggled and he hit a cop in the jaw. And the result of that is that the news story is that he's been in jail for 9 months now for breaking a lamp. But he clearly wasn't in jail for breaking a lamp. He was in jail for 9 months for hitting a police officer. The police here are scary. They've only just today made it mandatory to record confessions because there are so many cases of coerced confessions and coerced in the worst ways. So while I think cops they live isolated lives here, I feel sorry for them in a way, because when I'm at Fuji Rock Festival, I go out of my way to say hello to police, because people don't talk to them. But the reason people don't talk to them is you don't want to get into any trouble involving police in Japan, because if you do, one, you're in a hole for like innocent or guilty. Well, one, if they grab you, if they decide, if they find you interesting, you're done. You're guilty, and you'll be in jail for a year even before you go to trial. And I know there are cases that exist that include involving foreigners who have been to trial, who have been in that 0.1% of people who win and are found innocent after the trial, but still were in jail for 1.5 years before the trial. A bit like what Gon's going through as well. So do not mess with the police here. And although I think they are generally good, at least in terms of avoiding escalation in the first place, when people try it on with them, these people all do martial arts. They all, they use suppression techniques, which can be really dangerous, and they can make anyone confess. It's how the whole system here works. However, sometimes you don't need police officers to have safety. Another crime story. I don't like doing crime stories, I said at the start of this, but here we go again. Have you guys seen this video? This video is kind of cool. Well, one, it should never happen, but okay, you talk about trains that are famous for molesters, perverts, chikan, that feel people up on the trains. There are a number of train lines which are particularly notorious. The train line, the Saikyo line that goes from Saitama to Ikebukuro, actually connects through Shinjuku and Shibuya as well, is particularly notorious. And apparently on the Saikyo line at Akabane Station, as is unfortunately often the case, apparently a groper targeted some schoolgirls who, unlike the normal case involving schoolgirls, they decided to, there was a group of them, and they started shouting, "This guy's a molester, this guy's a molester." So when it got to a train station, Akabane, the guy got out of the train and he ran. Somebody just happened to be there on the platform and had the presence of mind to turn on a video camera. And there's a fantastic video of this guy running with 3 schoolgirls chasing him, screaming, "This guy's a groper, this guy's a groper." And somebody standing just near the stairs there indeed took the opportunity to sneakily stick out a leg as the guy ran past and tripped him up. Now, some people have been asking why does mass media now protect his face? They do this, especially the guy still hasn't been, convicted or arrested yet, so they don't want to get sued, and, this is what happens here. They do protect people's identities, although the initial clips that were getting circulated, it was getting circulated on Twitter, you could see everything, and, good job the girls, good job the guy who tripped him, and the police who picked him up soon after. Again, shouldn't happen at all in the first place, but I'm sure he would have. Yes, he did confess. Actually, he did confess. Perk, the police, the news story did say that they detained him and he admitted to the allegations. Although I imagine he wasn't given any choice. And what happens to him? I imagine again that guy probably had a job and everything, and he's now famous, and he's famous in the worst possible way. Deserves it, you should. What's wrong with people that this happens? Without wanting to paint a picture that this happens all the time in Japan. There are the fact that there are train lines known for it, the fact that there are internet groups where gropers would plan doing this sort of thing. Yeah, there still is a problem here which needs to be addressed. But there you go. And this is just a random thing that during the week got a bit of a debate on Twitter. A lot of people found it mysterious to see this photo, this right-wing trucks going past where Trump was nearby, where basically everybody bow before the emperor and amend the constitution. And these normally quite racist nationalist right-wing trucks were driving past, but they also had American flags and they had "Welcome to Japan" written on them, which people found to be visually ironic. And I just for fun retweeted this as well, and someone tweeted back to me who said, anyone who really understands, who's ever talked with a real right-wing group member, would know that it's not inconsistent that they would be pro-American. And I said, yeah, of course. But at the same time, who cares? They're drooling maniacs, and they're statistically insignificant. Why do we need to understand them? And the person said, well, you shouldn't be fostering ignorance. And I'm like, well, I think it's okay to foster ignorance of extreme nationalists, especially, just given how much of a fringe they are in Japan. However, I will take the opportunity on this show to quickly explain, as I've explained before, the right wing in Japan is not, they are racist. They are racist towards, often racist towards Koreans, although ironically many members of these groups are themselves ethnically Korean, or they're members of gangsters that are paid, they do it for money. They're members of groups. Again, the weekly magazines have gone into this. Without any sense of irony, there are North Korean citizens who are members of these right-wing groups. Who some do it out of sincerity, some just do it for money, some do it as part of their extension of their gang activities. And for the people who are ideological, they're not doing it from a skinhead perspective of being racist against all, simplistically against all people who are not Japanese. It's politically motivated. Right wingers typically love Taiwanese. They're good with Taiwan. It's not a pure anti-Chinese thing, but they have a really big problem with Chinese socialism, and this was also what motivated Japan and its genocidal persecution of Chinese, not just in China but throughout Southeast Asia during World War II as well. There was a mix of prejudice, but remember there were Manchurian Chinese and Taiwanese Chinese who were fighting for the Japanese as well, so it wasn't purely anti-Chinese. It was the association of politics and ethnicity. Same with Korea, and the anti-Korean stuff. Throughout all of this, remember, it was the United States which let all the war criminals out of jail, which funded the LDP and basically funded all of the right-wing, the extreme right-wing and gangsters and thugs to go and fight against the leftist groups in Japan during the 1950s, when America feared that Japan might be pivoting towards becoming a socialist country. America doubled down and became the best friend of the Japanese far right wing. Basically the right was funded by and is deeply invested in supporting with. This is why the LDP, this is why Trump got such great treatment while he was in Japan. The American alliance is the backbone of the Japanese right wing. So it's totally natural to see these very unpleasant people going around with a flag saying "Welcome to Japan" to President Trump. But yes, it does look visually ironic, particularly if you just assume that these people are purely racist or purely skinheads or neo-Nazis, which is not exactly what they are. But there again, their views are so, generally speaking, insignificant on the whole spectrum of things. I don't think you need to take the trouble to understand them, but since some people seem to care about it, that's the explanation. We are up on time, so I'm just going to see what else we've got. Oh yeah, you might recall all of the buzz about Weird Japan when apparently a bunch of international news based on an NHK news story were covering the story of rental families, that people could have, lonely people could have a rental family. I don't know, it might address this problem that we are starting to see with all of these shut-ins and parasites and NEETs, neither in employment, education or training people, that are now causing all of these social incidents. Maybe the family should just pay for a fake family. The problem is that was fake news. That wasn't real. The company that was featured, it was a scam, it was lying. NHK admitted this week that the story was fake. So now we've got to see if all of the international media that followed the news story and also featured it also will admit that it was fake. That said, it's kind of, they're a little bit off the hook in a way because this came from NHK, but at the same time, it also shows that people will jump on any story that shows Japan as being weird and not fact check it themselves. And it took a long time for this to come out, so that was awkward. In another story from the future, a driverless train, in our AI feature, a train freaked out and injured 20 people today when it spontaneously moved backwards and crashed into a barrier. Not quite clear what happened there. Not sure if this is the rise of the robots yet or whatever, but yes, that is a thing that happened and people are freaked out because that's quite a big one. Asian Boss, do they actually do rental? I've seen the videos where they feature rental stuff, and so yes indeed. I guess you guys have all seen the new Pokemon game that's going to for me as a parent, yes, thank you. It's going to rewarding Pokemon's tickets just in the same way that Pokemon Go rewarded people for walking, Pokemon Sleep. Somehow it's going to reward kids for sleeping. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work, but if it will make my son go to bed and wake up properly in the morning, which kids are prone to not do, I'll pay for this app. I'll get him all the Pokemons he wants, so that's interesting. I think I actually showed this last week. These are companies that are the most popular for young people to join nowadays, or that they most want to go and join if they want to change companies. If you want a sense of the current economic state, I think I showed this, but in terms of the most popular companies, if this loads, and it might not load, and if it doesn't load, we'll just skip past it, but it is loading slowly, and let's go and check out the graphic, which is Suzuki Oyama. And yeah, there are still some foreign companies are still really popular for destinations for people in Japan, but let's it's kind of hard to make out. In fact, actually, I think I could zoom in on this graphic somehow. Yeah. Oh man, they don't make it easy, do they? What the hell? Trying to read it. I had this before. This obviously worked better on PC screen than it does on mobile. Here we go. Well, maybe I can make it out. So you can make out from the top there. Toyota is still the #1 company. 2 is Google, second most popular. 3 is Sony. 4th is Amazon. 5th is ANA. 6th is Nintendo. Then you got Gel, Panasonic, Rakuten, Oriental Land, which is the Japanese company that owns Disneyland in Japan. Guriko, the sweet maker, HIS, the travel company. So Nippon Seimei Hoken, life insurance company. So you can see in the top 12 there, still Toyota, Sony up there, but you've got Google and Amazon up there as well. You've got ANA, Nintendo, game companies, travel companies are pretty high there. So just interesting. Yeah, YouTube influencer is not on this list. It still is popular with school students, though, if I recall correctly. And what else have we got here to wrap up? Some people, that's right, there was a tweet this week, someone pointing out a meeting of business leaders with President Trump. What do you notice about this photo? Extremely diverse group of people. There is one woman in the entire room, a room of business representative of Japanese business leaders, and she doesn't look entirely comfortable. Yeah, it's a sausage fest. Japanese business management is still a sausage fest, and there was a perfectly reasonable comment made. This photo sort of breaks my heart. A gathering of Japanese business leaders met Trump last night. Only one woman. Things are changing, and I know young Japanese people view the world differently, so change will come, but for now, only one woman. I retweeted this. Yes, I mean, this shows a structural problem with the society. This shows inherently that there are obviously still barriers to women becoming leaders in Japanese companies that have not yet been properly addressed, and it still highlights as evidence of a problem. A lot of people came back and said, no, if you start being equal opportunity for women, that's going to be disadvantageous, it's going to be discriminatory towards men. People seem to be really sensitive towards the idea that trying to redress structural inequality towards women could become discriminatory towards men. But what can you do? Obviously this photo is evidence of a diversity issue. So, I thought that was interesting. We had an interesting debate about it on Twitter, so remember, you can follow me on Twitter if you ever want to join into these debates. The best food in Japan, we're 6 minutes over, but very quickly, I think ranking 5, Kyoto. Kyoto's famous. I don't go out of my way to eat Kyoto food. I know people say it's great. It's kind of bland and austere, if you ask me, but of course it's good food. And Udorf, it's all nice. I wouldn't go out of my way to eat it. Niigata, rice and sake is what I associate Niigata with, which is what it says here as well. Osaka is like punch you in the face flavor. It's sweet, it's okonomiyaki, it's takoyaki, it's mayonnaise and bonito flakes. I think it's very foreigner friendly actually. Osaka has very clear flavors, although not what you typically associated with Japanese food, but Osaka's great food. Fukuoka, my hometown in Japan, that is pork broth, and yes, they do good ramen. You know what, other than pork ramen though, I don't know, Fukuoka is really famous for fish, but I don't remember really liking very much of the fish down there, to be honest, to be keeping it real. So you've got that, buttered tofu, yeah, maybe, and then you've got Hokkaido. Hokkaido, yes, I agree, and Hokkaido is awesome because it's like a big New Zealand. It's where all the butter comes from for a start. That's the first thing. You got all the ice cream, all the milk-related production, all comes from Hokkaido. You've got all the crab, the seafood, plus they eat lamb, they eat Genghis Khan up there, they eat venison. They eat everything up there, and it's all fresh, and it's awesome. So I totally agree. Not so much for the style of cooking, just for the fact they just have awesome food, including what little scarce butter there is in Japan. Now, of course, Hokkaido is not able to supply all of Japan with butter, and that is why we need free trade. But to the extent that if Hokkaido didn't have such crappy minus 40 degrees Celsius winters, I would love to live up there. For the food, right? So I totally endorse that as the top choice. And finally, I think this is the final one. Japan has mint chocolate butter. I think that's right. I didn't get to talk about this last week. It was on my list. I haven't tried this yet. Now, where do you even get this from? I'm not sure what I would do with this. But where can you buy it from, did they say? It mixes two things that I love, but you can sometimes mix things that you love and it's not necessarily a good thing. Yes, I think I use the expression, flamethrowers and petrol. You could like both of them, but it doesn't mean you should have them together. But somebody's gone and done it. Where do you get this from? Indeed, the Chocomint is going crazy. I've just gone over my weight limit, so what can you do? I'm okay, Andrea. I can still get a stash. I still get by it, but just the idea that we have cookie rationing and supermarket rationing of butter is just ridiculous. And hopefully under the TPP and the deal with Europe that will get addressed. But in the meantime, I guess this is one way of making the butter go longer, is mixing it with Chocomint, so that you can stretch the block further. Perhaps that will work. And I do like Chocomint, but I'm not sure I would try this. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Butter ice cream. I do like Chocomint ice cream. And butter ice cream, it just seems like a waste if you ask me. I do like Cornish. It's not Cornish actually. Cream teas. But with the clotted cream, that's the stuff. That's what we have to get here. To have clotted creams, you have to have a surfeit. You have to have excessive, butter and milk supplies. So yes, what can you do? It is going berserk. Sorry about that. Sorry that you can hear that, Mr. Cordychap, but it's hot, and the computer heats up the room as well. So what can you do? So that's the shot. Those are all the topics. We're 10 minutes over, so I won't do any music at the end. I'm going to go back to editing Japan Business Time. I look forward to seeing you all at the same exciting time next week. Don't forget to like if you like the video. And I'll check the sound if it's too noisy. Sorry to hear if that's the case. Nissan R33Z tune. Good to see you, and yes, I will also get back to working on your track, which I haven't made progress on, but good to see you all. Remember to like, and have a good week. See you all next week, and look out for some Japan business time coming at you soon. Music, you want music? I'm going to get back to editing tonight, so maybe next week. So see ya. Booyah. Peace. Yeah, I owe you guys some music, so definitely I'm going to maybe upload some loops during the week. So see how we go.